Throwaway because my wife knows my main. I, 39M, have been married to my wife Lisa, 37F, for 12 years. We've got 2 kids, 10 and 7, and 1 cat who seems permanently annoyed at all of us. For the longest time, I thought our marriage was steady. Not perfect, but comfortable. We had our routines: Saturday soccer games, pancake breakfasts on Sundays, movie nights with the kids. Lisa always said therapy was for people who can't handle life, so I never pushed it when she refused the idea years back. But then something shifted. Lisa had been distant for months, short-tempered with me, quick to criticize, and always glued to her phone. I thought it was stress. Work, parenting, life, who isn't stressed these days? Then, out of nowhere, she announced she'd found a new psychologist in town and was starting therapy. Twice a week, no discussion. At first, I was relieved. Maybe this would help her, help us. But what happened next didn't feel like healing. She'd come home from those sessions glowing. Radiant. Almost euphoric. Neighbors even noticed. "Lisa looks radiant," whispered Mrs. Peterson over the fence. "Almost too happy," joked the soccer coach at pickup. And yet with me, she was colder than ever. Her patience was gone, her affection non-existent. She'd brush me off with a nasty, "My therapist says I need boundaries," anytime I asked why she was being so distant. One night, while I pretended to be asleep, I heard her whispering into the phone. "Tomorrow again? Same time? I can't wait." That was the moment my gut screamed at me, something was very, very wrong. After that night when I overheard Lisa whispering on the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The tone in her voice wasn't the voice of a wife venting to a friend or scheduling an appointment. It was softer, lighter, almost giddy. I knew that voice because it was the same one she used to use with me when we were dating. The next morning, I asked her casually, "Hey, who were you on the phone with last night?" She didn't even blink. She just shot me this sharp look and said, "Confidential, Mark. My therapist told me to keep boundaries. You wouldn't understand." Then she walked off like she'd just shut down a child. Boundaries. Suddenly everything was about boundaries. If I asked why she was late, it was boundaries. If I asked why she seemed happier when she came home from therapy but treated me like furniture, it was, "You don't respect my boundaries." It was like she'd been handed a script to shut me out, and she was reading every line perfectly. At first, I thought maybe this was just a therapy phase, like she was processing things and would eventually settle down. But then the inconsistencies started stacking up. She claimed her sessions were at 4 p.m., but she often didn't come home until after 7. Once, she told me she had a breakthrough session that ran late, but when I checked her car's GPS history, thank you, paranoia, it showed she'd been parked outside a cafe across town for over an hour. Then I found the notebook. She left her tote bag on the bed one night, half open. Inside was a spiral-bound notebook labeled Therapy Journal. I probably shouldn't have opened it, but my hands moved on their own. What I read didn't feel like therapy notes at all. Pages filled with messy handwriting, hearts in the margins, sentences like, "He understands me in ways Mark never could. I feel alive when I talk to him. Tomorrow, coffee after session?" My heart races just thinking about it. I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. This wasn't therapy. This was flirting in disguise. These weren't clinical reflections, they were love letters dressed up as self-help. I confronted her immediately. I stormed into the living room holding the notebook and demanded, "What is this, Lisa?" Her face went pale, then twisted into that condescending smirk I'd grown to hate. "Wow. You went through my private therapy journal? Do you know how toxic that is? My therapist warned me you'd try to control me like this." So now I was the villain. The liar. The toxic husband who was apparently the root of every problem in her life. She spun it so fast that I almost doubted myself. Almost. But those words on the page burned in my mind. He understands me. He makes me feel alive. That night, she slept downstairs. She said she needed space to think about whether our marriage was even worth salvaging. Meanwhile, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how the woman I built a life with could twist everything so easily, how a man who was supposed to be her therapist had crossed a line that should never be crossed. And the worst part? She didn't even try to hide the glow the next day. She floated through the house humming like she'd won some secret prize, while I dragged myself through the motions of being a dad and pretending not to be shattered. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just an affair. This was manipulation, and I was losing my wife to a man who was supposed to stay professional. The day after I found the so-called therapy journal, I couldn't function at work. My head was spinning with every word I'd read, every smirk on her face when she dismissed me. I kept thinking, maybe I misread it? Maybe it was just her venting? But deep down, I knew I hadn't misread anything. Those weren't reflections, they were confessions wrapped in notebook paper. When I got home that evening, the kids were upstairs doing homework, and Lisa was in the kitchen scrolling her phone like nothing had happened. I sat down across from her and told her straight up, "Lisa, I know something's going on between you and your therapist. You're crossing a line. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend it's normal." She didn't even look up from her phone. Just let out this dramatic sigh and said, "Mark, this obsession of yours is exactly what my therapist warned me about. He said you'd project your insecurities on me instead of working on yourself." My insecurities? My obsession? I nearly laughed in her face. She's the one sneaking around, and I'm the problem? I told her, "Lisa, I'm not projecting. I found the notebook. I read your words. Don't stand here and tell me I'm imagining things when it's in black and white." That finally made her look up. But instead of shame, I got anger. "So now you're spying on me? Violating my privacy? This is why I need therapy, Mark. Because you suffocate me. You can't stand the idea that someone actually cares about me, listens to me, instead of dismissing everything I say like you do." That last part hit me like a freight train. Not because it was true, but because she believed it. Or maybe she'd been coached to believe it. Every sentence out of her mouth sounded like it had been spoon-fed by him, the so-called professional who was supposed to be helping her, not weaponizing her against me. I tried to keep calm for the kids upstairs, but my voice was shaking. "Lisa, a therapist doesn't meet clients for coffee after sessions. A therapist doesn't write love notes in journals. You're being manipulated. Can't you see that?" She smirked, arms crossed, that smug little tilt of her head. "Or maybe, Mark, I'm finally seeing clearly. Maybe he's right about you." That cut deeper than anything. I wanted to scream, throw things, demand she stop with the lies. But instead, I walked away, because the kids came thundering down asking what was for dinner. And in that moment, I realized she didn't care about the damage she was causing, not to me, not to the kids, not even to herself. She cared about him. Later that night, when the house was quiet, she knocked on the bedroom door. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd apologize. Instead, she leaned against the doorframe and said, "Mark, my therapist thinks we should try a trial separation. He says it would give me space to figure out who I am without all your negativity." Trial separation. Coming from her therapist. I stared at her, stunned. It wasn't just an affair anymore. It was a calculated dismantling of our marriage, orchestrated under the disguise of therapy. That was the night I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope it would blow over. I had to find out the truth, even if it destroyed me. After she dropped the trial separation bomb, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to Lisa's steady breathing downstairs on the couch. My mind kept looping the same thought: if she's this bold at home, what is she doing when she thinks I'm not watching? By morning, I'd made up my mind. I had to follow her. Not because I wanted to play detective, but because the gaslighting had twisted me into doubting my own sanity. I needed proof, not for Reddit, not for a lawyer, but for myself. That Thursday, she left at 3:30 p.m. with her tote bag slung over her shoulder, hair done, perfume heavy in the air. She claimed she had a 4 p.m. session. I waited 5 minutes before slipping out and following at a distance. She didn't head to the office. Instead, she drove across town to a little cafe tucked away in a quiet strip. She parked, checked her makeup in the mirror, and walked inside with a bounce in her step I hadn't seen in years. I parked 2 spots away and sat there, palms sweating on the steering wheel. When I finally worked up the nerve to step out, I moved to the window. What I saw made my stomach lurch. There he was. The psychologist. Not in his office. Not behind a desk. But leaning across a small table with 2 cups of coffee between them, laughing at something Lisa whispered. Her hand brushed his arm, lingered, then pulled back only when he reached out and touched her wrist in return. It wasn't the kind of casual contact between therapist and client. It was intimate. Too intimate. For a moment, I froze. My body screamed to burst inside, flip the table, drag her out by the truth she kept burying. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of making a scene, maybe it was knowing she'd just spin it as me being paranoid again. So instead, I pulled out my phone. Hands shaking, I snapped photo after photo through the glass. Lisa laughing, Lisa leaning forward, his hand on her wrist. Evidence she couldn't spin away. I waited until she left an hour later, floating out of the cafe like a teenager leaving her first date. She didn't come straight home either. She stopped at a store and picked up a single bottle of wine, probably to play the role of relaxed mom by the time she got back. At dinner, she was cold again. Snapped at me for not seasoning the chicken, told the kids to clear the table without even glancing at me. But when she poured herself that wine later, she was humming. Humming, like she'd just lived a secret life while I sat at home clueless. That night, I sat in the garage scrolling through the photos, bile rising in my throat. Proof. Finally, proof. But the question burned in my head, what now? Do I confront her with this? Do I confront him? Do I go straight to a lawyer? I walked back inside and found her curled up on the couch, texting with a smile plastered on her face. I wanted to rip the phone out of her hand and throw the photos in her lap. But instead, I just stood there, invisible in my own home, while she giggled at messages that sure as hell weren't from me. That's when the rage finally sank into something deeper. Something colder. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was done being lied to. Done being played. Done being gaslit by the woman who vowed to love me and the man who swore an oath to help people like us. The next move had to be mine. I couldn't take it anymore. The photos burned a hole in my pocket all weekend. Every time Lisa smirked at her phone, every time she brushed past me like I was invisible, every time she dropped "my therapist says" like it was scripture, I wanted to scream. By Sunday night, I snapped. The kids were upstairs, the TV was humming in the background, and Lisa was curled up on the couch scrolling her phone with that smug little grin. I walked over, dropped my phone on the coffee table, and opened the photos. Explain this. Her smile vanished. She looked down, scrolled through the pictures, her and him at the cafe, her hand on his, the way they leaned in like teenagers sneaking around, and her face drained of color. For a split second, she looked guilty. Then the mask came back. Are you serious, Mark? You followed me? You took pictures like some creepy stalker? Do you even hear yourself? I could feel my pulse in my throat. Don't turn this on me, Lisa. You told me you were at therapy. You were on a date with your therapist. This is beyond inappropriate, it's an affair. And you've been lying to me and the kids for weeks. She laughed. Actually laughed. Wow. You're really that insecure, huh? We were just talking. He suggested we meet somewhere neutral to get me out of the house. You know, since you make it such a toxic place. There it was again, toxic. The word she clung to like a shield. I slammed my fist against the table, making her jump. Stop using his words to gaslight me. This isn't therapy, Lisa. This is you sneaking around with a man who's supposed to be helping you, not touching your wrist in a coffee shop. Her eyes narrowed. She crossed her arms and leaned back. Maybe if you'd actually listened to me the past 5 years, I wouldn't need someone else to. That line cut like a knife. Not because it was true, but because she delivered it like a rehearsed script. And in that moment, I knew she'd been coached. He'd been planting these seeds, twisting her view of me until I was the villain in her story. I tried one last time. Lisa, do you even hear yourself? You're throwing away our marriage, our family, for a man who is violating every ethical boundary in his profession. He's not saving you, he's using you. Her face hardened. Or maybe, Mark, he's saving me from you. The kids must have heard me shouting, because our daughter peeked down the stairs with wide eyes. I forced myself to lower my voice, but the damage was done. Lisa just smirked, grabbed her phone, and said, "I'm done with this conversation. If you can't handle me being happy, that's your problem." She stormed out the front door, leaving me shaking, my daughter crying quietly upstairs, and my world crumbling around me. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just fighting for my marriage anymore. I was fighting for my sanity, and maybe even custody of my kids, against a wife who lied like it was second nature and a so-called professional who knew far too much. Lisa didn't come home until nearly 2 a.m. that night. I sat in the living room waiting, phone in my hand, half expecting the police to knock on the door instead of her key turning the lock. When she finally walked in, her hair was a mess, perfume still clinging to her. She didn't look guilty, she looked smug. "Still up?" she asked, like she was coming back from running errands instead of sneaking out on our marriage. I wanted to demand where she'd been, but I didn't need to. I already knew. "Still," I said, "Lisa, this has to stop. You're destroying our family." She kicked off her shoes, grabbed a blanket, and plopped onto the couch like she owned the place. "Actually, Mark, my therapist and I talked about this tonight. He says your controlling behavior is toxic. That I deserve to find happiness. That staying in a marriage where I'm not fulfilled is worse for the kids than leaving." I almost choked. He says. Every word out of her mouth was his, not hers. "Lisa," I said, my voice shaking, "a therapist doesn't tell you to sneak around in cafes and stay out until 2 a.m. A therapist doesn't tell you to call your husband toxic because you got caught lying. This isn't therapy, it's an affair dressed up as self-help." She smirked, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and said, "Or maybe it's the first time someone's actually been honest with me. He makes me feel alive, Mark. He doesn't dismiss me. He doesn't roll his eyes when I talk. Can you say the same?" That line, "he makes me feel alive," was like déjà vu. It was in her journal. I realized then it wasn't even her words. She'd probably repeated it to him, and he'd fed it back to her like a script. I wanted to scream. To shake her awake. Instead, I just sat there, numb, staring at the woman I used to love, wondering how she could sit there in my house, under my roof, and talk about me like I was the villain while defending the man who was crossing every professional boundary imaginable. The next morning, she doubled down. At breakfast, in front of the kids, she tossed out, "Dr. Roberts says you need to learn better communication skills, Mark." Like she was quoting scripture. Our son asked, "Who's Dr. Roberts?" And Lisa just smiled and said, "Someone who actually helps me." I nearly lost it right there. That day at work, I couldn't focus. I kept replaying her words, the smug smile, the way she used therapy as both sword and shield. I realized I was up against more than an affair, I was up against a narrative being carefully crafted by a professional who knew exactly how to twist the knife. That night, after the kids were asleep, I made a decision. If Lisa's therapist was going to keep hiding behind his office and her lies, then I'd bring the fight to him. I'd book a session myself. I needed to look this man in the eye and see what he'd say when I was sitting across from him. I called his office on Monday morning and booked a session under my own name. The receptionist didn't even blink, apparently he took new clients all the time. My appointment was set for Thursday. 3 days of pure hell waiting, pretending everything was normal at home while Lisa floated around humming, texting, and dropping his name in every other sentence like he was the second coming. Thursday finally came. I walked into his office, my stomach in knots. It was exactly what you'd expect, soft lighting, bookshelf lined with psychology texts, motivational posters on the walls. And then he walked in. Dr. Roberts. Mid-40s, slick haircut, expensive watch. He smiled at me like I was just another patient, like he hadn't been sneaking lattes and love notes with my wife. "Mark," he said, extending his hand. "Nice to meet you. What brings you here today?" I wanted to break his hand. Instead, I shook it, sat down, and said, "My marriage." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers like he was in some movie. "Tell me about that." So I did. I told him how Lisa had changed, how she came home glowing after sessions, how she quoted him constantly, how she'd become cold and detached from me. I watched his face the entire time, and not once did he look surprised. Not once did he stop me and say, "Wait, that doesn't sound right." He just nodded, scribbled notes, and occasionally muttered, "MHM." Finally, I dropped the bomb. "I know she's been seeing you outside of office hours. Cafes, long conversations, hands touching. I have pictures." For the first time, his mask cracked. His pen froze mid-scribble. But instead of denying it, he actually smiled, and said, "Mark, you're clearly very insecure. Lisa has told me as much. These accusations are part of the dynamic that makes her feel unsafe with you." I nearly exploded. Unsafe? She's meeting her therapist in cafes and writing love notes in journals, and I'm the unsafe one? Do you have any idea how unethical this is? You're not helping her, you're manipulating her. He didn't flinch. Sometimes clients form strong attachments during the healing process. It's not unusual. I stood up, shaking with rage. This isn't attachment. It's an affair. And you damn well know it. He sighed, as if I was the difficult one. "Mark, I think it would be best if you respected Lisa's journey. If you keep resisting, you'll only push her further away." That was it. That was his play, subtle threats wrapped in clinical jargon. I stormed out of that office with my blood boiling. He wasn't just a man having an affair with my wife, he was weaponizing his degree to rewrite the narrative, to paint me as the villain and himself as the savior. When I got home that night, Lisa was waiting. Arms crossed, smug smile plastered on her face. "Dr. Roberts told me you might try to sabotage my therapy. He said you'd get desperate." I laughed, an ugly, bitter laugh. "Lisa, open your eyes. He's not saving you. He's stealing you. And you're letting him." But she just shook her head and said, "Or maybe you're just afraid I finally see the truth." For the first time in 12 years, I realized she wasn't coming back to me. Not as long as she was under his spell. After my session with Dr. Roberts, something inside me broke. Not just the trust in my marriage, but the part of me that kept hoping Lisa would snap out of it, that she'd wake up and realize what she was doing. Sitting across from that smug bastard while he twisted everything into his little narrative made one thing clear: I wasn't just losing Lisa, I'd already lost her. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions: work, dinner, bedtime routines with the kids, but inside, I was hollow. Every time Lisa opened her mouth, it was like I was hearing Roberts's voice instead. "Mark, you're controlling. Mark, you're toxic. Mark, you never listen." It was like she'd been reprogrammed, and I was just the villain in their shared story. One night after dinner, she dropped it on me as casually as if she were talking about a grocery list. "I think we need to separate. Dr. Roberts says it would be healthier for me. And for the kids too, since they don't need to grow up around constant negativity." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "Lisa, you're basing life decisions on what a man you're sleeping with tells you." Her eyes narrowed, and she gave me that cruel little laugh. "God, you sound pathetic. He's not who you think he is. He's a professional. He sees how toxic this marriage has been for me. He's helping me reclaim my happiness. Can you say the same?" I almost threw the plate at the wall. Instead, I clenched my fists and said, "You mean the same man who meets you at cafes, who lets you gush about how alive you feel, who puts his hand on yours like you're his girlfriend instead of his patient? That professional?" She didn't even flinch. Just smirked. "Maybe you should try therapy, Mark. You clearly need it more than I do." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the kids. How they were already noticing the tension, the icy silences, the snide remarks Lisa threw at me. My daughter had asked me the day before, "Daddy, why is mommy always mad at you now?" And I didn't know what to say. What do you tell a child when their mother is blowing up the family because she fell in love with her therapist? I sat at the kitchen table until 3 a.m., staring at the pile of photos, the notebook, the lies stacked so high they could bury me. And I realized I couldn't fight this war alone anymore. The next day, I called a lawyer. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Lisa anymore. It was about protecting my kids from growing up in a house where lies were the wallpaper and gaslighting was the soundtrack. If Lisa wanted to throw herself into the arms of a man who used his degree as a pickup line, fine. But I wasn't going to let her drag me and the kids down with her. When I told Lisa I'd spoken to a lawyer, she laughed. Actually laughed. Good. That just proves what Dr. Roberts said, that you're all about control. And now everyone will see it. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and realized the woman I married was gone. In her place was someone who believed every poisonous word a manipulative therapist fed her. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Once the word lawyer left my mouth, the war officially began. Lisa stopped pretending to play nice. She moved from smug smiles and snide comments to full-on open hostility. Every conversation turned into a weapon, every interaction a battlefield. She started telling the kids little digs about me when she thought I wasn't listening. "Daddy's always angry, isn't he?" Or "Daddy doesn't understand mommy's feelings." My son, only 7, started asking if I was mad at him when I told him to brush his teeth. It crushed me. Then came the kicker. Lisa told me she was moving out for her mental health and taking the kids with her. "Dr. Roberts says it's important I create a positive environment," she said, like she was quoting a sermon. I told her flat out that wasn't happening. I wasn't letting my children be dragged into her delusional affair under the guise of therapy. That's when she smirked and dropped, "Well, if it goes to court, I'll just tell the judge what my therapist says about you." It felt like my blood turned to ice. She wasn't just lying, she was building a case against me, one that could use Roberts's professional title as a weapon. I met with my lawyer the next day. I laid it all out, the photos, the notebook, the late-night phone calls, even the text messages I'd caught glimpses of. He listened, nodded, and finally said, "This isn't just an affair, Mark. This is malpractice. If you want, we can pursue both custody and a formal complaint against him." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't completely powerless. Maybe the truth could still matter. But of course, Lisa doubled down. She strutted around the house acting like she'd already won, tossing out lines like, "Dr. Roberts says I'm brave for taking these steps," or "Dr. Roberts thinks you're clinging to control." It was like living with a cult member repeating the words of their leader. The breaking point came one night after the kids were asleep. I confronted her in the kitchen, showed her the photos again, and said, "Lisa, you realize every single thing you're doing is destroying your credibility. You think he's going to protect you, but when this blows up, he's the one who'll vanish and leave you holding the bag." Her face twisted with rage. She slammed her glass down on the counter so hard it cracked. "You're pathetic, Mark. Do you know how small you sound? He cares about me. He makes me feel like someone. Not like you, who's just dead inside." That hurt, but not the way she thought. It didn't make me feel weak, it made me realize just how far gone she was. There was no coming back. The next morning, I packed a bag and took the kids to my parents' house for the weekend. I didn't tell Lisa where we were going. For once, I wasn't reacting to her manipulations, I was making a move for myself. As I watched my kids play in my parents' backyard, laughing like the world wasn't collapsing, I made myself a promise: I would protect them from this madness. No matter how messy, no matter how ugly the fight got, I wouldn't let Lisa or her so-called therapist rewrite the story. Because I finally understood, this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the beginning of a battle for my children's future. Filing for divorce was the hardest signature I've ever put on paper, but also the clearest. There was no future left to fight for with Lisa. She wasn't my wife anymore, she was a mouthpiece for Dr. Roberts, parroting his words like they were gospel. Every toxic and controlling and unsafe accusation wasn't hers. It was his. When the papers were served, she tried to play it cool. Smirked, shrugged, said, "Dr. Roberts said you'd do this. He says it's your way of running from your own issues." I didn't even argue. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to. Her words didn't matter anymore. The legal fight wasn't pretty. My lawyer filed a complaint against Roberts with the state board, attaching every photo, every journal page, every timestamp I'd collected. Dual relationships with clients was the phrase they used. Apparently, it's one of the biggest ethical violations in psychology. He could lose his license. Maybe he deserved worse, but it was a start. Lisa tried to paint me as the bad guy in court, throwing around all the therapy talk she'd memorized: controlling, manipulative, emotionally stifling. But when my lawyer laid out the evidence, the cafe photos, the notebook filled with heart doodles, the late-night calls, it wasn't me who looked unstable. It was her. And him. I won shared custody, which was all I asked for. I wasn't trying to take the kids from their mom, but I wasn't about to let her drag them into her fantasy either. The judge made it clear that any testimony from Roberts would be considered compromised. I saw the flicker of panic on Lisa's face then. For the first time, maybe she realized he wasn't invincible. The months that followed were brutal. Divorce is a war with no real winners, only survivors. The kids cried, my parents tried to stay neutral, and I spent too many nights staring at the ceiling wondering how the hell my life had unraveled this fast. But slowly, something shifted. The house felt calmer when Lisa wasn't in it. The kids laughed more. The air didn't feel heavy with lies. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat in the quiet and let it hit me. I hadn't just lost Lisa. I'd lost the illusion of the marriage I thought we had. And as painful as it was, maybe that was the clean break I needed. Looking back now, here's what I've learned. If your gut tells you something is wrong, trust it. Don't wait for permission to act. Gaslighting will make you feel insane, but evidence doesn't lie. Collect it, protect yourself. Love without trust isn't love, it's dependency dressed up in routine. And most importantly, people who cross boundaries once will do it again. Whether it's a cheating spouse or an unethical therapist, believe them the first time they show you who they are. So here I am, Reddit. Not a husband anymore, but still a dad, still standing. My marriage is over, but my life isn't. And if anyone reading this ever finds themselves in the same hell, don't let someone rewrite your reality. Fight for the truth. Even if it breaks you first, it's the only way to build something real again.